So in this part of the series, we're going to be basically installing all of our dependencies with Composer. Now, as I mentioned in the last video, Composer is a dependency manager for PHP. And this will basically let you use Composer to install these dependencies, transfer around with this project the dependencies that are required, and then also when we run the Composer update command, this will update the dependencies if a newer version is available. So you'll need to go ahead and download Composer. I'm not going to cover this in this series simply because it depends on what operating system you're working with. But what I've done is I've opened up a terminal window here, aside from the MySQL one, inside of the Google directory that we have open here. So what I want to do with this is I want to go ahead and use Composer to actually install the Google API client. Now, to check I've got Composer installed, I can just type Composer. As long as you see something like this, you have Composer installed, and we can go ahead and create the composer.json file required to manage our dependencies. So inside of our Google directory, this is the root directory, remember, let's create a new file. I'm going to save this out, and I'm going to save this in here as composer.json. Now, you should be aware of JSON, but JSON is it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's basically a lightweight transfer format. So sort of like XML, but a lot cleaner and a lot smaller in file size because everything's a lot simpler. And this is used by a majority of languages, and it makes sense here because what we can do is create our outer object, use require as an object. This is a property here, a property that holds an object, and we can now define the Google API client. Now, you might be wondering where you can find this from. There's a website called Packages that stores lots of different packages basically that can be installed with Composer and used as the dependencies for your project. But the Google one happens to be Google/API client, and this is also available on GitHub as well. So if you're having trouble finding this, go ahead and look it up and dive into it and see what you think. So this is from the Google account, the API client repository, and this is where we're pulling from. So this is all we need to do basically. Now we're over inside of this directory, we can use a Composer install. I'm not going to run this command just yet because I want you to pay attention to this area here. When I hit enter, you'll see a vendor folder automatically created, and we'll go through this in just a moment. So when I hit enter here, keep watching for that vendor folder. So you can see that the vendor folder has been created and everything looks like it's installed. So let's check this out here. You'll notice that compose.lock file has been generated, and you can see here the README. This file locks the dependencies of your project to a known state, so you can read more about it here if you're interested. So inside of vendor now we have Composer, which has its own folder because it's its own dependency, and we also have Google. Now inside of Google we have API client, and we've got the source code for this. Now we don't need to worry too much about going into any of this because I'm going to teach you how to use this library. But more importantly, inside of the vendor folder we have this autoload.php file that has been generated by Composer. Now what this will do is it will automatically load in, or not automatically, but it will define all of the dependencies that need to be loaded in from your project. If we had more dependencies here, there will probably be more inside of this file. So what we can actually do is inside of init.php we can require this file in later, and what that will allow us to do is use the Google API easily. We just require it in and we're done. So we've now used Composer to install our Google API client as a dependency. This will update when we use the Composer update command, so we can do that if we want to. But for now, we're all ready to go, and we can actually start to use this as we need.